She took off her heels at midnight. I make shoes for people who think they're buying leather and leave with permission. Before a foot ever touches a last, I read a life. The way someone stands when they're sure no one is looking, whether their left shoulder carries what their mouth won't say, the little storm a knee makes when it's had to be braver than it wanted. You can't hide from a shoemaker. Not really. We're cartographers of weight and weather. My shop sits on a quiet block that pretends it isn't 3 streets from a stadium. In the mornings I lift the gate, breathe in tannin and beeswax, and the city remembers I'm here. People wander in because the world has tired them out, heels like arguments, sneakers wide with regret. I listen, I measure, I promise a future where they don't count the steps home. My wife, Zoe, runs a gallery that believes in paintings you have to back away from to understand. She likes to stand an inch to the left of whatever's beautiful and tell you why it almost failed. When we met, she walked into my shop with a broken strap and the kind of look you give a stranger you've already imagined having coffee with. I fixed the strap. She waited at the bench and asked how I knew where to stitch. Shoes tell you where they want to be held, I said. She smiled in a way that changed the temperature of the room by 2 degrees. So do people, she said, and the thing between us nodded like an old friend. We built a life without writing it down. I started keeping a second toothbrush at the gallery and a spare mallet at home. She learned the names of my leathers. I learned which artists made her eyes widen. On Sundays, we walked the long way to the market, her hand inside my pocket because my hands run warm. At night, she'd sit on the counter with a glass of wine while I oiled soles on a towel and told her how a good shoe can make a bad day apologize. Once, after a show opening went well, we danced in the kitchen to a song with too much trumpet, barefoot on cool tile. She kissed me with that slow confidence people assume is staged and whispered, "You ruin other men for me." I promised to try to ruin them kindly. The first wrong thing arrived like a pebble in a shoe. Too small to stop you, too insistent to ignore. Zoe texted, "Running late, don't wait up, love you." The words were ours, but the tone was a borrowed key. When the door finally clicked near midnight, she came in quietly, heels in her hand, legs bare and city rose on her cheeks. She padded to the sink, drank water like a woman in a movie, and set the shoes on the bench. Expensive, yes. New, no. The soles were scuffed on the inside edges only, which meant she'd been leaning towards someone and didn't want me to see it. I reached for her waist and felt her stiffen a millimeter, nothing you'd notice unless you make a living noticing. A scent hung in the air that wasn't ours. Not her usual citrus and iris, not the trace of my wax. Laundry soft musk, the corporate kind that thinks lighting a candle is a personality. Under it, the faint cedar I put into a pair of Oxfords last spring. I hate cedar in shoes. Everyone says it's protective. It just smells like a winter coat lying about its taxes. But a certain client had insisted, and I'd obliged, and standing in the dark kitchen beside my wife, I could hear those shoes again, calling to their owner. She kissed my cheek. "You're up," she said. "Working," I lied, for the first time in our marriage. Lies don't echo right. They sit on the shelf and watch you pass them every day, daring you to dust them or throw them away. I didn't dust mine. I did what we do when we're afraid the map will show a place we can't get to. I narrowed my world. Shop, coffee, stitch, sleep, repeat. A week later, a flamenco teacher walked in carrying a duffel and a kind of stillness I didn't want to disturb. She introduced herself as Isla and set the bag on the bench with respect. "I need boots," she said, as if that sentence could also mean, "I need breath. I need something to hold my body's argument without telling it to hush." I unrolled my measuring tape. Her feet were dancer's feet, strong, stubborn, a small scar at the base of her right big toe where shoes not made by friends had taught her to compromise. I asked about heel height and weight distribution. She answered like a musician, with rhythm instead of numbers. When she slipped off her socks, the raw grace of her made me swallow in a way the room could hear. "We usually do this standing," I said. "Weight evenly across, then forward, then back." She stood like this. Like that. Her calves held a secret, her arches kept promises they hadn't yet made. I took the outline, the instep, the arch length, the circumference that tells a boot where a leg will misbehave. She watched me with a focus I wasn't used to being on the receiving end of. Maybe I was ready to be held in the way a shoe is held, with craft, with curiosity, with the hands you reserve for things you want to last. We scheduled a fitting. She left behind the scent of sweat after it chooses to be salt instead of apology. Zoe's gallery threw a benefit for an artist who'd set a thrift store couch on fire and called the video a meditation on family. Restaurants sent canapes. Donors practiced nodding. The man whose cedar Oxfords I had learned to recognize attended with a tie that made his shirt look like it owed him money. He's the sort of restaurant investor who collects neighborhoods like cuff links and women like seasonal menus. Outside, he shook rain from his sleeves. His shoes didn't mind the water. My work rarely does. He saw me and smiled with the politeness of a man who remembers tipping. "Walkable art," he said, flicking his gaze toward his own feet, the way people do when they want you to consent to their version of flattery. They still turn heads. "Shoes don't," I said, smiling back. "Feet do." I could feel Zoe before I saw her. A room changes when someone you've loved learns a new dialect. She moved like an apology practiced to sound like a compliment. When she looked at me, I saw the person I'd met, quick, lit from the back. When she looked at him, I saw quiet. The kind of quiet you get right before music that doesn't belong to you begins. After the benefit, I pretended I slept. The next morning, I pretended I wasn't making coffee like I was cradling an argument. You can only pretend so long before a seam shows. I looked through the doorway and saw Zoe sitting at the edge of the bed, her head bent, her phone held like something with a pulse. For 1 second the light caught her wedding ring and drew a bright line to her mouth. She slid the ring off and placed it on the coverlet, then picked it up again when she heard me. We were a rehearsal for a play without a set. "Breakfast?" I asked. "I'll grab something near work," she said. The way she said near made me think of that man's restaurants, which tend to open wherever sidewalks have taught themselves to be smug. In the shop later, Isla arrived like an answer to a question I'd been pretending I hadn't asked. I helped her into the boots half finished, vamps supple, counters firm, the heel measured to hold her without insisting. She laced slowly, like she was translating a language into another language she loved equally. When she stood, the room corrected its slouch. She walked to the center of the floor, set her feet, and gave me a few compas, palms, floor, breath, soft then hard, then soft like a good conversation. The boots spoke back in leather, a low, confident thud. I'm not a dancer, but the physics of desire doesn't change from art to art. You find the center and circle it until the world agrees you belong there. "Too tight at the throat?" I asked, kneeling to read the creases. "Just right," she said, her hand on my shoulder for balance. The heat of her palm bled through the cotton of my shirt and rested against my skin like something with its own ideas. We were two people in a shop. Nothing happened. Something happened. YouTube would have approved. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed either. I made a delivery to the investor's newest dining room, a gleaming place with banquettes upholstered in the color of compliments. He'd ordered a second pair, a show-off pair, a toe cap that sloped like a well-kept secret. I arrived an hour before service. Hostesses fluttered. kitchen noise hummed. His office door was partially closed, the way a mouth is when it wants to be kissed but knows it shouldn't be. Her scarf was on his chair, the cheap silk one she kept in her tote for days the weather couldn't make up its mind. It smelled like her hair after rain, like the lotion she pretends has no fragrance, like the life we hadn't yet admitted was changing all by itself. Evidence is a scalpel. I picked it up, I cut. That night, Zoe came home early. She set her bag down like it might claw its way open on its own. We stood in the kitchen, trying to invent small talk in a room that had never needed it. "I made boots today," I said. "I sold a painting," she said, and we both heard the past tense like a dare. Her mouth tightened, then softened, then tried to invent a third option. "You can tell me," I said. It came out quiet, the way a person asks if you're cold while handing you a blanket. "I don't want to lie to you," she said. She never was good at it, and I loved her more for failing. "I didn't plan this. People rarely plan gravity." She laughed, a broken, beautiful sound. It felt like being seen, and I let it feel that way. "Do you love him?" I asked, because sometimes you have to aim the question at the exact organ. "I love the woman who can walk into a room with him and not have to explain herself." She looked up at me with clean eyes. "I've been tired of explaining." I wanted to rage, to make a mess we'd never clean up. But mess has been my job for years. Glue on palms, dye on knuckles, bits of welt that stick when they're supposed to surrender. I choose structure because chaos always arrives uninvited. I stepped forward. She stepped back, not out of fear, out of respect. For me, for herself, for the absence we were about to install. "I don't want to share a lie," I said. "Me neither," she said. "I want to leave before we start pretending we don't remember how we got here." We split the next weeks into piles: paperwork, plates, playlists. We hugged like colleagues who refused to be enemies. She packed. I pretended to sleep on the couch and then actually did, surprised by how quickly a body will adapt when it's told the truth. I worked. Work is a boat that doesn't ask where you're headed. Isla returned for the final fitting. The boots sang when she snapped her ankles and let the heel talk back to the floor. "They make me braver," she said, "and if a craftsman tells you that's not the only compliment they ever wanted, they're lying." "Performances?" I asked. "Thursday, small theater by the river. Come if you like." "I like," I said, and realized I did. The theater was a little miracle, a stage the size of a kitchen, a lighting rig that tried its best, chairs that forgave your posture. Isla walked onto the floor dressed in black with red at her mouth, and a flower that didn't need an audience to do its job. The guitarist plucked a first line that tasted like smoke and old houses. When Isla lifted her arms, the room exhaled. I've never been jealous of art. It doesn't take from you what love needs. It just shows you where to aim. She danced like a person who knew the earth could be an instrument if you asked nicely and then insisted. The boots held her, carried her, dared her to be tender, and then rewarded her for it. I felt, in the absurdly literal way a person like me feels, that I had made something that deserved to exist. After she found me by the side door where the knight had been leaning to listen. "You came," she said, a smile that carried both relief and something sly. "I heard you," I said, "with my hands." We stood close in the chill, the river thinking it was an ocean 2 blocks away. She touched my wrist where the veins make suggestions to the skin. "You look less haunted," she said. "I put the ghost in the right room," I said. She laughed low. "Do you want to dance?" "There's no music." "There's always music," she said, and stepped into me like a girl who trusts her balance because she built it herself. We swayed to the traffic, and to a melody the city hums when it's almost midnight and generous. Her head fit under my chin like she'd rehearsed it alone and was pleased to find the choreography held with a partner. Our kiss was inevitable and undecorated. No theatrics, no hunger trying to prove an argument, just the slow press of two people who wanted to see if stillness could be a verb. Her mouth was warm, and when she drew back her fingers stayed folded at my collarbone like a bookmark, which meant we could return to this sentence later and pick up where we left off. T, I asked, because a man can do worse than be civilized when everything else is learning its new names. Yes, she said, and walked beside me like we were already in practice. We didn't undress. We didn't rush. She sat at my workbench while the kettle thawed, running her fingers over scraps of leather like she was petting a small and noble animal. I poured. We drank. She asked about stitch length and I answered. I asked about compás and she taught me a pattern on the table, palms, knuckles, the heel of her hand. When she laughed, I could feel it through the wood. At the door, she kissed me again in a way that promised the next time we would be less careful and still kind. I don't want to be a rebound, she said. I don't rebound, I said. I resole. That's worse, she said, smiling against my mouth. And we stole one more kiss because sometimes metaphors deserve friends. Zoe and I signed the papers 2 months later on a Thursday that behaved like a Monday. We didn't choose sides in the apartment. It chose for us. She kept the gallery's spare toothbrush. I kept the mallet. We meant it when we wished each other good lovers who could read them without footnotes. Isla and I took the long way with intention and impatience in equal measure. On mornings when the city was already noisy, she'd stand in my doorway while I laced her up before rehearsal, her fingers on my hair, my thumbs pressing the leather over her instep until it admitted a new softness. On nights that felt like a kitchen song, she'd teach me to step on 2 and 5 and ignore dignity if it asked to cut in. We kept our hands where cameras would have let them, and then moved them a little when no cameras were around. The world survived. My shop kept breathing. People came in limping and left standing taller. I still tell them shoes want to be held where they're already strong. Most days I believe the same about people. Sometimes when the afternoon drops its shoulders and the window learns the light it likes best, I look at the bench where Zoe's heels once rested and at the floor where Isla's boots declared themselves, and I feel what I wished for both of them and for me. Not perfection, not even penance. Permission. To leave the wrong room. To enter the right one. To take off your heels at midnight because they hurt and put on something that wants you to get home.